Hey, good evening. Welcome tonight to tonight's Providence Presbytery Presents. The purpose of this meeting tonight, this discussion tonight, is to continue to be together and to share some of the good work that's going on in our community in this area. My name is Cole Kessel. I am a congregation member at Grace Presbyterian Church. I will be one of your co-moderators tonight.
I'm John Novichevsky. I'm from Covenant Pres in Rock Hill.
So tonight's topic is human trafficking. I'm going to introduce our first panelist. Her name is Hannah Arrowood. She's the executive director and founder of Present Age Ministries. She started the organization 12 years ago, and they exist to combat the sexual abuse, exploitation, and trafficking of teen girls. They do this by equipping communities through awareness, education, and prevention programs while addressing the needs of identified survivors through holistic support services. Hannah, thank you for being here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having us tonight, guys.
I'm going to introduce Mark Blackwell as the president and founder of Justice Ministries. He began this organization in 2010 to combat the sex trafficking of women with a focus on rescue and housing. Their mission is to locate victims of sex trafficking and sexual exploitation, help them get out of their situation and into a safe place, facilitate an environment conducive to healing, and assist them in their transition to independence. Mark, thanks very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much. My pleasure.
And lastly, we have Sergeant Ashley Horton. She's a part of the Human Trafficking Task Force unit with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department. She's also worked with the FBI Task Force unit for years. Ashley, thank you for coming out and being with us tonight.
I appreciate it.
So let's stick with you, Sergeant. For those of us who are not familiar with this topic, can you explain what human trafficking is and what's your role?
Yeah, so human trafficking is the, basically to make it simplistic, is the force, fraud, or coercion of a person who has to trade sexual favors or labor for something of value. And for, when you're talking about dealing with an adult, those are the things we're going to look for, is the force, fraud, or coercion. If it's a minor, we don't have to prove those things. You don't have to, you don't get the choice, I guess would be the best way to say that, if you're a minor, to be involved in that involuntary servitude. So for us, where we come in as law enforcement is those elements that we're looking to meet from a statute, whether it be state statute or from a federal standpoint. We are looking to prove that someone transported, they harbored, they obtained a person in involuntary servitude. And then, like I said, for an adult, we look to see if they were assaulted, if they were threatened, if they were defrauded in the sense of if they were told that they wouldn't have to be doing this very long, or they would be given a certain lifestyle for this. And then, you have that other aspect where we start to see coercion, not only from threats or like deportations and things of that nature, but also with drugs.
One kind of follow-up question. Help me understand how the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department and the FBI work together, or where do they work differently?
So we actually, for CMPD, we have two detectives that are assigned to the FBI to work with an agent. We also work with an agent from Homeland Security to investigate all the cases. So we have the luxury, I believe, that I can take a case at a state level to Mecklenburg County or wherever it applies in North Carolina and meet those elements. Or, the burden of proof is a little higher federally. So if I can meet those elements federally, then we would take it there. And, we get more prosecutable time as far as someone going to prison, maybe potentially longer federally because there's mandatory minimums than we do at a state level, but I can go either place. And to be quite honest, at a state level, I can arrest someone immediately and get them in jail. Federally, it's a little bit different process. So we may have to wait a little bit of a longer time before we can actually arrest someone.
So Hannah and Mark, can you both tell us a little bit about your organizations and how you combat this issue? And Hannah, if you'll start off.
Sure. So at Present Age Ministries, as Cole said, we're committed to combating the sex trafficking of specifically minors. And so what that means for us is we work specifically in providing support to those that are under the age of 18. And what we know that across the United States, the average age of entry into this is 14 years old. And so for those of you that might be listening, you might have children that age. You might have grandchildren, nieces, and nephews. And the reality of it is that it seems so confusing, like how does that happen to a 12-year-old, a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old? And so especially in this world that we have just experienced through the pandemic and things, when you think about grooming and recruitment, so oftentimes that happens through online means, through social media apps, through social media platforms and things of that nature. And so it makes it very easy for that recruitment to happen and for those vulnerabilities to be exploited. And so for us as an organization, with our frame of reference being those under the age of 18, all of our efforts are geared around that. So when we do advocacy in the community or training with partners such as law enforcement or training emergency room health workers or juvenile court counselors, we're looking through that lens. What do they need to be looking at it for a 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old? When it comes to our prevention, that's really our heartbeat at the organization. We would much rather prevent this than having to respond to the crisis of it. And so some of the ways that we do that, two specific ways, is North Carolina passed a law, Senate Bill 279, that says that education has to take place in the health classes of 7th and 8th graders. That was 5 years ago, and it's still not happening across the state. So for us, we work with school systems at the county level as well as at the individual school level to either come in and provide that curriculum at the classroom level, assembly level, or train teachers so that they can facilitate and provide that curriculum in the classroom setting so that we can start to help them have this awareness of, what am I looking for? Could this be happening to me? Wait, my boyfriend says he loves me, but I've never actually met him. All of those kind of scenarios to get little 13, 14-year-old brains to start thinking about. And then when it comes to direct services, again, we work with solely under the age of 18, which means we also work with families. You know, if you have a 15-year-old, that's coming with a family. And so whether that's biological family, whether that is foster family, whether that is a group home, the placement can vary. And for us, it was very important for us to create a holistic model that would support the child wherever they reside. Because there isn't always an ideal case. I think for the longest time in this world specifically, it was we have to get them out of here and get them to a safe house. Well, that's a great step and could be a part of that child's process and that journey of healing, but there's always going to come a time where they come back home. And so what does that look like? And so for us, services to a client of ours would look a variety of different ways. They get case management, which is individualized, so they're putting together a plan. What does this child need in terms of medical needs, in terms of psychological needs, educational needs, relational needs, spiritual needs? What does that parent need? Do they need parenting classes? Do they need counseling? Do they need family counseling? There's so much that goes on. I think for any of us that work in this world, we enter the life of a client at one of the darkest moments. They'll tell you it's not their worst oftentimes, but one of the darkest moments. And so we have to, as a community, realize that that affects not only them, but those in their life, their families, if they have children, you know, and there's a journey, it's a process. And so for us, one of the benefits that we can offer to our clients is we don't have a time frame. This isn't like you have 6 months, hope you can get all better in 6 months, and then you're good and then you're out. You know, for us, on average, our clients are with us about 18 months, some of them 3 and 4 years, that we're providing this intensive level of consistent services to them so that they really can live a different life when they leave from that place from us.
Thank you, Hannah. And Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Mark Blackwell. I'm the Director of Justice Ministries. And first off, I want to say these two ladies to my left are some of the biggest rock stars in this work. So it's an honor to be sharing the stage with you guys, and thank you all for hosting. We're a counter-human trafficking agency, a 501c3, and we're based out of Charlotte, but we serve North Carolina and South Carolina as a whole. Basically, our deal is that we reach out to at-risk populations, and we do that through a variety of outreach efforts, and we provide emergency services and also transitional care for the individuals we serve. The majority of our clients are U.S. citizens, adults, females. However, we do serve the broad range as it comes across our desk. Just domestic adult women is the majority of our client base. We have served males, members of the LGBTQ community, as well as minors in some cases, but we do need special assistance in those cases as well. So our deal is, you can remember it through the 3 R's. We reach out, relocate, and help individuals rise up to an independent situation. Our model is not new. We basically use the model of the Good Samaritan to meet someone in their vulnerable and endangered scenario, and we help them with the most basic of resources: transportation and logistics, emergency shelter, food, and basic resources. And we find that when we're connecting with these individuals, they're literally have just escaped this situation, or sometimes need our assistance with an exit plan in that. And what we do is essentially provide the logistics and transportation to get away, and provide emergency shelter. And that can be anywhere from 3 days to 3 months. Kind of the emergency window is 0 to 90 days of emergency shelter. From there, we move into what we call more programmatic care, and that's where we're trying to find long-term shelter placement, which could be a 12-month or 24-month housing program. And we also assist with transitional housing, which is subsidizing their own independent living situation, helping with the finances of that, while they eventually take it over fully themselves. And kind of similarly to Hannah, some people we work with for 3 weeks in their emergency window, and we pass them off to the next organization, and we were kind of just helping with that level of care. But we have other clients we've been working with for 7 years that are in our transitional care program, where we're helping with weekly, really just helping them do regular life stuff. So many of the young women we serve, their trauma began at a young age. The formative 14 years old to 21 years old, that's a critical 7 years. And there's a lot of sometimes life skills or life coaching that they didn't get to enjoy. So when it's time to buy a car or to figure out finances or apply for work, any of us would have relied on family or a close friend to help coach us through that. So we spend a decent amount of energy through kind of case management and mentorship in those topics as well.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. Sergeant Horton, is this really an issue in our area here, Mecklenburg County, York County, surrounding areas here? Is like I said, is this an issue in our area?
Absolutely it is. And I think a lot of people have a misconception that this is not native to our area, that people are, kidnapped or brought into this country, and that it really has nothing to do with us. But I'm going to say 95%, if not higher, is people, or whether it be an adult or a child, that is from Charlotte, from Cabarrus County, from Gaston County, from Rock Hill or South Carolina. Everyone that I've ever encountered is, with the exception of probably 1 to 2%, are from our area. A lot of times I think we're looking for something that's like a big organized ring of traffickers, like our movies tell us, and it's not that way. Oftentimes it starts in a relationship. It's definitely the boyfriend-girlfriend scenario. It could be, same-sex partners, but you also have that female-to-female dynamic, kind of that mentorship, that big sister friend dynamic as well. So, and that's really what we see on a sexual servitude side. We see that's the most obvious to us, right? But behind our closed doors and hidden are the labor traffickers, and that can be from a adopted parent scenario we've seen. It could be from your own parents. It could be from a work standpoint. And so we get almost 400 to 500 cases a year here that we have to sift through. And, for us, we have to see the solvability of it. But, it's very much something that is present, that you see day to day.
Hannah, what what's your territory? How is this present in our area through your organization?
Yeah, well, as Ashley Sergeant Horton said, they're getting hundreds of cases, right? And so for us, working and providing that support to minors, it becomes one of a thing that can sometimes honestly feel overwhelming. We currently receive referrals from a 6-county radius surrounding Mecklenburg County. So if it touches Mecklenburg County, we get referrals and we provide services of that. And we even get called into, oftentimes in different states, to provide, if you would, coaching, consulting, like what do we do in this situation? We obviously aren't physically there, so we can't be there to provide the services, but there aren't a lot of child-serving agencies that have success in programming, and so we just oftentimes get called in there. And so what we see is the same. I think it's one of the things that I think is so critical for people to understand. I have this conversation pretty much at least once a month, and it's really kind of, I'm feeling myself getting angry as I'm thinking about it, is this. You heard from one detective sergeant that they get 400 to 500 cases that they're filtering through. Just because we don't have a case that goes to trial doesn't mean we don't have a victim. Just because we can't solve it and prove it doesn't mean we don't have victims. We still get those. Agencies like Justice and ourselves, we still have to deal with the aftermath of that. And so one of the things I get asked all the time was, well, how many cases have there been? Well, why don't we see about it more? Well, I'm like, ask your DA. I don't know. That's what I want to know. But I think it's just this reality of that. I want to remind everybody is there's a 14-year-old who's lived through that, where sometimes they're forced to serve, 8, 10, 12 people a day to do whatever is demanded of them. And regardless of whether or not our detectives that never sleep can prove it, doesn't mean that there isn't an aftermath to deal with. And so for us, it's really a never-ending thing. And like I said, very rarely is it the 3-week thing unless we're relocating them for some security reason, right? It could be a couple months, and then maybe they run away because maybe they get triggered and they're not ready to deal with their trauma. But then they come back 3 months later, and now they're a little bit more ready. And then there's that pattern that we are able to follow. And I say able to because it's a choice. We could say, oh, well, you weren't consistent, so we're not. But if you really truly understand the reality of this complex trauma that they're dealing with, you realize that is to be expected. And we should be prepared to navigate in such a way that we can follow that pattern, if you will. We've had some girls, and I say literally chase them all over the United States. Yeah. I'll call Sergeant and say, we found her, she's here, help me, call the police there, because at the end of the day, she was 13 when we first started this. At 13 years old, how can a 13-year-old does not have the mental maturity and the brain development to be able to say, oh, wait, this is utterly going to destroy my life when I keep making these seemingly choices. And it can be frustrating. It can be real frustrating. But I think the one thing that is so important is that, especially from our lens, from Present Age Ministries lens, is that they're babies. And they deserve a chance to be able to have a different life. And if that means that we have to fight for them until they can learn to fight for themselves, then so be it. And that's the role and the position that we take.
Mark?
Yeah, so for us, we're based here in Charlotte, but we serve North Carolina and South Carolina as a whole. With that said, similar to what Hannah's saying, the high majority of our work is within the 50-mile radius of downtown Charlotte. I mean, that makes sense, the population density, and a lot is passing through Mecklenburg County, as Sergeant Horton is saying. But we have the opportunities as well when we do have a case in, Raleigh or Greenville, South Carolina, or, Spartanburg or wherever. We definitely respond to those cases as well. We just try to be flexible for whatever call comes across our hotline. We try to field it as best we can. With our hotline, the process is it goes to a female team member who someone's manning that mostly 24/7 as best as we can with our volunteer manpower, and then we'll basically get a team together if it requires immediate action, and then kind of similarly to a very specific taxi service, we will try to figure out where they're at and coordinate travel for them, scoop them up, get them far away from the situation into a safe location, and then begin care at that point.
One follow-up. So, Mark, you mentioned y'all kind of have a hotline. Is how clients you're informed. Hannah, how is your organization informed of clients or those in need?
Great question. we never have anybody call us and say we want help. We usually have to convince them. All of our referrals come from our community partners. For us, those community relationships are vital. It's a lifeline for these young girls specifically. So those come from law enforcement, whether it's local, federal, state, homeland, things of that nature. But we also work very closely with like our Department of Juvenile Justice, so our court system, because they're seeing kids who seemingly are in trouble for certain things, and then you start to go, wait a minute. Okay, you were arrested because you stole a car, but when you stole a car, you were with 5 older men, all over the age of 21, and there was cash in the trunk. Wait, something's not adding up, one of those scenarios. And so working with our judges and our court counselors, obviously we work with Youth and Family Services, Department of Social Services, and foster families, foster kids, as well as our Levine Children's Hospital emergency rooms, school systems. If somebody touches children, chances are we probably have a relationship with them and are working to make sure what our concept is we don't want there to be any wrong door, meaning regardless of what door that child walks into, that there's a connection point to get the services and the help that they need. So child advocacy centers, things of that nature, we are working with them so that if they can identify that this child might be a potential victim of exploitation and trafficking, then we can get involved and provide support and services for them.
And I was going to just piggyback on that. So most of our clients being adults, it's a little more fluid because all we need is an invitation, from them. But our hotline rings from victims calling us directly, from law enforcement partners, and also the national hotline through the National Resource Center. When calls are more Carolina-based, sometimes they'll just redirect them to us. And then occasionally another nonprofit that we work with may stumble across a case and need us to partner with them there. With children, we need social services involved or oftentimes cooperation from the judicial branch to help us work out custody issues.
So we hear this question posed in various ways, but how has the pandemic affected you? Hannah, if you'd like to lead off.
So that's a great question. Let me paint a scenario for you, maybe with a story. I have a daughter in high school, so I will talk personally. My daughter's very active. She's a competitive dancer. She's a straight A student, and yet the reality of it is this world has secluded and closed everything off, right? And their worlds went entirely online, as if it wasn't online enough, right? We already knew that was creating issues that we may never recover from a social interaction, from emotional stability. And so what we saw, I can remember, I actually released an article in March for a group in Mecklenburg County. They're like, what do you think this pandemic is going to do? And these were my words in March a year ago. I said, it's creating the perfect storm. Our kids are going all online, which means their emotional health is going to decline, which means that vulnerabilities are going to be targeted at extremely high rates. Okay, that was a year ago. And you fast forward to December 31st, 2020, and we had a 46% increase in client referrals. It took about 6 months for us to start seeing it. And you want to know where historically at Present Age Ministries, we saw referrals come predominantly through law enforcement and juvenile justice. We would get occasional ones from like a school system or an emergency room, things of that nature. Well, it completely shifted, right? Because, that's not the way it was presenting itself. Where it was presenting itself was in behavioral health in the hospital. And our kids were ending up in the emergency room, and they were ending up suicidal, they were ending up hurting themselves. And as the story progressed, they're like, wait, this is happening, wait, this is happening, wait.
There are less than 500 beds available currently right now in the United States for these survivors. So when they're pulled out of this life, there's very few resources for them to be able to find help. Present Age Ministries is a nonprofit organization committed to combating the sexual abuse, exploitation, and trafficking of teen girls.
The first few days with the girls are very critical. We use a holistic approach for the girls, which is individualized and integrated. We consider all aspects of their lives, so the physical, psychological, educational, relational, and spiritual needs that they have, and we come up with a plan that will be the best level of care for them.
When it comes to awareness, training, and prevention, we really want to engage the community. We know that we cannot do this alone, and so for us, we want to be able to go to the community and explain to them that this issue exists, as well as warning signs and how they can be a part of the solution. There's 100,000 children every year used in prostitution here in the United States. And so for us, those numbers are just not okay. We do it one life at a time. We don't look at numbers. It's one life at a time, one journey at a time.
We've maybe seen a little bit of an increase is that, think about your hotels, you have less clientele there on a daily basis. So now we have clerks that are noticing more foot traffic, or they're like, this is out of place. So we'll actually get more calls from the hotel industry because they're recognizing things. Our officers are having missing persons. Those have upticked quite a bit with runaways, which is normal for us anyway. But I think now we're starting to see the behaviors, the activities, because of people not being out as much. But it's definitely extremely high. And again, I don't have a stat, but I know our caseload is the exact same as it's always been, if not, probably slightly more.
Thank you. Mark?
Yeah, we've just echoing the same remarks. We've had the usual pace. We normally are on pace for about 1 or 2 new rescues per month, and we maintained that pace throughout the pandemic. We had, I think, 34 active clients, including transitional care clients. And the real interesting thing is, with that, there's also 16 children of those clients. So for ours, sometimes it's not just, well, I've got 34 mouths to help feed. It's like, well, they have kids too. They were pregnant when they arrived, or they maybe were in their transitional care, were able to regain custody of their biological children. So, we are happy to assist them with that as well. Speaking to what Sergeant Horton was saying, though, it was unique with the hotels that in the past, that's where a lot of this is happening. It's happening in hotels from the high end to the low end. But because of COVID, hotels are more conscious of who's staying. Are you quarantining? Do you have it? So they probably would question their guests more than they normally would. So we did see a little bit of that change, where it was less of, hey, come get me from this specific location. To our delight, many of the clients in 2020 were able to break contact themselves, and they're calling me from a McDonald's or a bus station or something like that, which is much easier for us. We'd rather do that than the location in question. So that was an interesting trend that shifted this year. It wasn't, hey, I'm in a room with this trafficker, he stepped out, can someone assist? It was, I ran away, and now I've got nowhere to go, I'm calling your hotline. So that actually for us made logistically a little easier. We could just coordinate transportation from wherever they had found themselves. So I wonder if that had a hotel correlation, with the concern of the front desk maybe removing people because you had a local address or whatever it was. But that was an interesting trend that we saw.
So, Mark, you said historically you've had 1 or 2 referrals per month. Sergeant Horton, you said 400 to 500 cases a year. Somebody's much smarter than me can figure out that math per month. Hannah, how many clients do y'all get referred to on a given month?
So pre-COVID,
Yeah, sure.
it was about 4 or 5 new referrals a month. And post-COVID, it was, several months we had 10 or 11 referrals a month. And so, it's a lot.
Yeah,
It's a lot.
And that's obviously a change that your organization has seen in the last year as well. One question I'm thinking of as I sit here, as a father of 2 young ladies, what would you tell someone or parents who don't think this could ever happen to someone in their family, but it may? And I'll start with you, Hannah, but then I'll go to you, Mark, as well, to say, once those young ladies are in college or or in their 20s, and what would you kind of say? Just I don't know.
It's my favorite question. It's my favorite question. So I've raised 2 daughters, and then I've raised a lot of other daughters. Those that were not our biological, but you adopt in. And here's what I will tell you, especially if they're young: don't wait until they're high school or college to start having these conversations. When there is, and this isn't foolproof, right? So nothing is, but when there is a foundation of belonging and acceptance and love, then that radar is much higher, right, then that radar to go off that something's wrong is much higher. And one of the things that we statistically know across, and this isn't a North Carolina thing, this is a national thing, is that 60 to 90% of victims of exploitation have a history of sexual abuse. And so as someone who experienced sexual abuse as a child, when that does not get addressed, that creates the vulnerability. And the reality is it's because you just don't know that what you experienced wasn't normal. And so when you experience that behavior, it feels normal. You don't recognize that it's not. And so I think it's just really having conversations, especially, I tell every parent who asks me these questions, like, talk to your child. Like, they're going to get annoyed at you, and they're going to be mad at you, and they're going to hate you, and get over it because they'll thank you. As a mom of an 18 to 21-year-old, they're like, thank you, Mom, right? Like, they'll get over you, and you'll get over that. So, but I think what every teenager, whether I'm sitting in a detention center with a child or whether I'm speaking at a conference across the country here's what every 13-year-old wants, is they want to be loved and they want to belong. And it's the thing that they're wrestling with the most, trying to fit in at school and trying to find their place and all of those things. And if they don't have that in their home, the place that they should have it, they're going to find it. And that's the simplest answer and the most complex answer I can give you. But they need to know that there's a safe place. They need to know that there's a way to have those conversations, even if it's not with you. One of the things we told our girls growing up is that we're not dumb enough to think that you're going to want to talk to us about everything, right? But so we surrounded them with people in their life so that when they had questions that they were like, I'm not talking to my mama about this, right? And let's be realistic, there's going to be those things, right? I'm not talking to my daddy about that. But there was people in their life that they knew they could. And so that we knew that they would be guided and be given solid information and again, it's not foolproof, but what they want is to belong. And so we've got to fill that void because otherwise traffickers are promising it. And it's hook, line, and sinker. And then they go in and they're like, I just thought that you were going to love me. I just thought I was going to be loved. And then their life explodes and then they're dealing with the aftermath of it.
Mark, anything additional on that?
Yeah, I mean, Hannah nailed it. That's exactly what I would share. The only other element is, the internet. Yeah. The game keeps changing. You'll think you're on top of it, and then there's new things that come out that I didn't even know was a thing. So I think it's just important for us to be very familiar with what is happening as it relates to the internet in our households and in their schools and with their peer groups, because it is still the Wild West, and it's a communication that is unrestricted. So yeah, be in your kid's business. There's a way to do that without being a helicopter parent. You pay for the cell phone, you pay for the Wi-Fi, you get to know what's happening on it. It's kind of the idea. And then I have a young daughter, and she'll probably won't date till she's 52. So that's the. But no, in reality though, that's my big ticket item is know your internet activity and what they have access to. I'm Mark Blackwell, president and founder of Justice Ministries. We're a nonprofit organization located in Charlotte, North Carolina. We serve victims of sex trafficking and sexual exploitation. Our deal is the 3 R's. We reach out, relocate, and help individuals rise up.
We help women that are trafficked or that are potentially trafficked that are in a situation that they don't have control of their life.
I felt God calling our church to serve whoever was in the area that we were in. And I found out that the people that needed most of our help were actually victims of sex trafficking.
To see them want mentorship and want to get out of a bad situation and into school or a new job or just a new life, want something more for themselves.
We want to share the love of God, and we want to show them that this is not something that they have to be involved in. If they want to get out, there is hope.
So the nonprofit pursues those who are in the sex industry or are being sex trafficked in order to help them get out of their current situations that they're in. We reach out to them in order to relocate them and help them rise up into being who all that God has called them to be.
Perfect. What can we do as individuals, as people of influence, or even at our congregational levels to fight this issue and to support what you guys are doing in your organization? Sergeant Horton, I'll start with you as these other two just spoke.
Yeah, so I think coming from a law enforcement side of it, kind of goes hand in hand with what they just talked about as well, is that, that community base, to first and foremost, like to have the people around you that can hold you accountable, can have conversations, can just be a support system. And that comes in various forms. That's probably the number one thing that I see, because I think that's really lacking in society today. You know, I'm a little old school back when, you know, everybody in the neighborhood knew what was going on. You may get punished for doing something at the neighbor's house and then you came home too. But, you know, everybody knew first and last names. We don't see that in my field as much anymore. And so just having the community there from an emotional standpoint and support standpoint is probably foremost the biggest, easiest thing that people can do. It doesn't cost anything. From a second part is to just be there. You know, if a lot of times these guys do fantastic work, and they're, you know, to their credit, I think what I do is the easier of the three of us. I just look for evidence and pass off the hard stuff to them, which is the, you know, the family dynamic of it. But, you know, just because I think you're underestimating the amount of people you work with, because we will call and say we have this person and they still reach out, and that person may not be receptive. And I think your numbers are a little low, at least for what I know I've called you for. So from that standpoint, but what's fantastic is they provide hygiene products. They provide gift cards for food. They provide things, clothes, like things that are just daily needs that we don't really think about, that these people may not have, or their families may not have. And, you know, it's very real. We can't dismiss the need for money, and the emphasis that's been put on money. And these young kids want that safety net, that financial stability that they may not have, but they want to provide. And we get that reason, I would think, a lot for why they're out here doing that. And, you know, so they're compensating, saying, hey, we'll provide money, food, shelter, all these things for you, a phone, so that you don't feel like you have to go and sell yourself for that. And I think, you know, those things are probably the most needs that I see. But like I said, it's free to just care. And that is utmost important thing that I can think of.
Mark?
Yeah, no, that's great. And to your point, you mentioned gift cards. Like, we had a church in Matthews give us like a stack of gift cards this big, like 2 weeks ago. Most of them are gone. Like, I mean, there's needs are just there, you know. So people can provide through basic things like gift cards. Obviously, you know, funding is very real. We're operating on, you know, roughly $25,000 a month, you know, that we're spending on, you know, just our programs and operations. And that goes quickly when you're a small nonprofit. So having more individuals help pour into that, or if they have connections with larger funding sources, you know, helping us engage that. Because I know for us, and probably true for Hannah, the fundraising is often on the back burner. When you have this much field work, that's something you're like, oh yeah, we need to work on that too. So helping us with speaking engagements and marketing and awareness is key. But, you know, kind of similarly to what Sergeant Horton said, you know, absolutely caring is huge. It needs to be on people's attention. I mean, human trafficking is kind of odd that it has waves of when it's trendy. I can tell because that's when I get a bunch of articles emailed to me randomly that I'm like, thank you. but the reality is we need people being attentive to it. So, you know, macro level, that can help lessen the activity if the general population is more aware and more engaged. And then also engaging with groups like us and with even the law enforcement community to help be a part of the solution and have their attention there. Prayer is key. I mean, we're dealing with some very wicked and demonic activities, you know, with this kind of stuff when people are involved with such horrible things. And it's, you know, it's on us to be aware of it, yes, but also to be praying for these individuals and really love them well in that. But then, yeah, practical support, whether it be funding or volunteerism. You know, you need money or man hours is oftentimes with most nonprofits, and that's a practical way to plug in.
Lastly, Hannah?
So yes, and yes, and yes, and yes. And then what I would just add to that, instead of repeating, is that I think one of the things that I would encourage anybody to really consider is that this is not easy, it's not glamorous, and it's going to be a sacrifice in some capacity. If you give, it might be a sacrifice. If you choose to get involved with an organization, it's probably going to be at a volunteer level. It's not going to be glamorous, meaning I don't know about Mark, and I hate to even say this because I don't want to discourage anybody, but we don't usually have a need for a group of 50 to come serve for 2 hours on a Saturday.
That's true.
That's just not, I'm like, can we repaint that wall? I don't know. I mean, just because we want to get people engaged, but what we need are those people who are like, I'll show up every Tuesday. I'll show up on Thursday mornings. Whatever it is, because specifically from a client perspective, if you want to work directly with those who've been identified as survivors, I need you to be consistent or I actually don't need you. And this is why, because that's what helps them learn to build trust with their community. If a different person's showing up every day of the week, they can't ever get settled. That radar in their brain can never diminish to say, oh, I can actually settle down and start to this process of healing. And so for us, it's very, we have a very strenuous training process for our volunteers on purpose. It's not only to prepare them, but it's also to help them learn how to be prepared to love well, like they've talked about, and to care well, as Sergeant Horton was saying, because that's really what creates this bridge for them to heal. And that's so critical. It's so critical. Yes, there's always going to be events if people want to do those 2 hours on a Saturday, right? We're always going to have events and things like that we put together at a community level. But what we need people to understand is that if you want to really get engaged in this at a really intimate level, anybody, you can pray from your house, you can serve from, you can send emails and tell your friends. Everybody can do that any time of the day of the week or any day of the week. But if you want to get engaged to volunteer, whether it's through prevention, whether it's through education and advocacy in the community or direct services, we're going to need a commitment. And that is just going to be a sacrifice on your part, but I promise you it'll change your life. You'll never be the same. But we just want there also to be realistic expectations so that when you get engaged, you know what you're engaging with and you're ready for it.
And just to kind of echo that, absolutely, Hannah. I mean, the consistency of volunteers, I regularly say, we need more essentially unpaid staff than volunteers because too often people can be more like tourists, and that is not what we need. This is incredibly confidential.
It's actually damaging.
It's damaging. To the girls. And even look at it from our perspective. If you damaged your knee and went in to see a doctor and every follow-up visit was a different physician, that would be incredibly frustrating, and you'd feel like you'd have to catch them up every time. And we definitely don't do that with our clients. There's no real need for them to repeat their story. However, if you have consistency with your volunteer or with your case management base, then once they kind of get the general, inside scoop, then they don't need it repeated. They are building off a foundation, and that's why for volunteers, it's almost like joining a team or seeing yourself as an unpaid staff member. The running joke I have for our structure, I say we're not like a normal nonprofit. We don't have a wall for you to paint at 3 o'clock on Saturday. We're more like a volunteer firefighter department covering 2 states. And how do they operate? You get on the schedule, and whether there's a fire or not, you need to be available, and you just kind of rotate it that way. And that's how we've tried to build our team. And I got to tell you, it's pretty small because that's sometimes a less interesting way to volunteer because it's kind of a part-time job, and we understand that's a huge commitment. So for those of you that want to get involved and are wanting to get plugged in, think about that. Be realistic about your margin of free time and what your skill sets are, what your work-life balance is, and let's try to get you plugged in a practical and effective way.
Well, we will we'll definitely share contact information for both your organization, and we're kind of nearing our time, so we greatly appreciate you both coming, as you as well, Sergeant Horton. Thank you for sharing about the work that you all do. Thank you for sharing about your organizations, and I'm going to ask John to close us in prayer.
Let us pray. Holy One, we thank you for these people who work tirelessly to combat the evils of trafficking. We thank you for their dedication, and we ask that you strengthen them in their endeavors. We ask your protection be around the children and the adults who find themselves snared by traffickers, and help us to break them free from their bonds. James told us, be doers of the word and not merely hearers who deceive themselves. Help the presentation today stir willing hearts to action rather than rows of heads that nod but do not move their feet. Keep us safe as we go about your work, and let us be the torchbearers carrying your light into the dark corners of evil. In your Son's name we pray. Amen.